The data from Chernobyl, there was actually the New York Academy of Sciences in 2010 commissioned a study, since the government in this country wasn't willing to look, and in Europe weren't willing to look, and in part because there was concern that if people understood the vastness of the problem following Chernobyl, people would be up in arms against any nuclear power, which is a major source of power in Europe. But this study that was commissioned by the New York Academy of Sciences looked at about 2,000 scientific papers that were published in the then Soviet Union and Eastern European bloc. So these were all scientific papers that were within the Soviet bloc attempting to monitor and follow the consequences of Chernobyl. And it's grim reading, but this book is still available on Amazon.com. You can find some. It was never a cheap book, but there are some affordable copies there, and it is really quite full of information. That picture that you can see there, that's the rings of the tree before and after Chernobyl. So I think trying to say that there are no biological consequences from this radiation is kind of foolish. There's a whole diaspora of people. I'm sure all of you, if you're treating people, you have some of them in your practice, people who fled the Soviet Union, who are sick to this day. My partner in the eye treatment I do, I learned a lot about treating macular degeneration and reversing that from a woman who had that disease herself. She was traveling to Sweden to present her work to the Swedish Academy. When Chernobyl blew up, she was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it ruined her health and eventually led to her death. But she is just one example of hundreds of thousands of people around the earth who are sick to this day from Chernobyl. So I don't want to stoke fear with this talk, but I think there needs to be a countering voice to the kind of silence that exists about these things. And the good news, which we're going to get to, is that you already have a lot of tools that will help with this. Next slide. Just want to talk a little about some of the data on how much danger is this. And I'm going to talk about cancer, but you need to understand that radiation can affect the body in a lot of ways. It isn't just cancer that it causes. In Chernobyl, they found a lot of respiratory disease, a lot of cardiac disease, a lot of hormonal disruption. And I'm not going to talk about a lot of that. You can go read the book Chernobyl and its Consequences, but cancer is the one that everybody thinks of, and I want to talk here. So this is just Sweden, for some reason, is one of the few countries that's ever really tracked cancer mortality for any length of time. And so starting before the First World War, they started tracking it. And you can see that there was kind of a plateau around 1940, and then it spikes up again. Next slide. And this is a graph, the BEIR-VII, that's from the National Academies, by mandate from our Congress. The National Academies are required every 5 years to revise this document. The BEIR stands for Biological Effects of Ionizing Radiation, BEIR. Biological Effects of Ionizing Radiation. The 7th volume came out in 2006, and this graph just shows 100 people, and it says that right now about 42 people out of 100 will be diagnosed with cancer from causes unrelated to radiation, it says. And this suggests that about one cancer per 100 people could result from a single exposure of 100 millisieverts of low LET. Low LET means low energy linear energy transfer. LET, linear energy transfer. Radiation, meaning something more like X-rays than from isotopes. So diagnostic X-rays, cosmic rays, gamma rays, those are probably going to contribute one additional cancer. But if you go, I don't know, Lee, if you can go back to that slide of the cancer mortality from Sweden, back in 1940, there weren't 42 people out of 100 dying from cancer. It was probably more like 25 out of 100. So there's a higher incidence. So go to the next. Higher incidence of cancer deaths now, and this is something that most oncologists agree on, that we definitely see more people dying from cancer now than we did 50 years ago. And the question that we will never be able to answer, but how many more of those additional cancers were due to exposure to ionizing radiation? How many of those circles on this cancer incidence graph that are now blue circles, how many of them should be stars? Additional cancers due to radiation exposure. We'll never know, but it's a concern. Next slide. And let's see. Kind of go down just until you see first and 8th year, Lee. Just keep advancing the slide. This is just a brief thing on information about the growth of cancer. Cancers don't appear out of nowhere. You don't not have a cancer one day and the next day have a cancer. Cancers on average take about 12 years to get big enough for you to find them on typical screening exams. But if you were looking carefully, you might find that at the 8th year, it takes about 1 billion cancer cells to be a gram of tissue. And the appearance of cancers, if it's due to radiation, could be sooner. Skin tumors could be less. Next slide. One of the things that radioactive isotopes do is they lead to damage of tissues, damage of DNA, but they can simply do damage that results in excessive oxidation. I mentioned here, I'm sorry I don't have this video to show you, but there's a video from Dr. Bruce Ames, his lab in University of California, Berkeley, where he actually shows a mitochondria moving through a medium spewing free radicals because it's been damaged internally. And the excessive, go to the next slide, or the excessive production of free radicals, it's incomplete combustion of toxins, and it just magnifies the damage. So this is one of the ways that radiation causes damage to other systems other than cancer. But it's the damage to the DNA that is one of the things we're worried about as well. Next slide. And so DNA, RNA, it's a crystal, and I just mentioned here the work of Rosalind Franklin. She showed that with X-ray very elegant X-ray diffraction studies, that DNA has joints. DNA is about 6 feet long, but can fold and compress to something the size of a wavelength of light, 1 angstrom. And those joints, when the DNA folds on itself, all of those joints become the outside walls of the compressed DNA, RNA. Go to the next slide, which is what is the result of damage to RNA, DNA. Those joints contain the switches that control apoptosis. Down again. So if you have a folded strand of DNA or RNA and there's an alpha emitter or a beta emitter lodged in the nearby tissues, it's going to be hammering that DNA and RNA, and the repeated insult to these switches by the radioactive particles and the free radicals they produce, they damage these switches, and eventually the cumulative damage, you lose the control for apoptosis, and you have an oncocell formed, a cancer cell, a cell that is no longer able to turn itself off. Next slide. So environmental levels of radioactive isotopes, they're only going to continue to rise, but, and this is where we're going to get into the remedies, unless you were scared to death of mercury and lead, you've learned to kind of accept the sorry state we all live in here, where we're in a world that's very contaminated. We have to accept this fact and learn techniques to deal with it. And the techniques are very familiar to anyone who's worked with heavy metal toxins like lead and mercury. I just say here their presence is a fact of life, and we just need the strategies. So next slide. Some of the strategies we're going to talk about, obvious things: avoidance, displacement, detoxification, antioxidants, immune system support, surveillance. We're going to talk about all of these a little bit. Avoidance, Isotopes, they concentrate in the food chain, so don't eat animals at the top of their food chain. Don't eat large animals that have concentrated these things. These things exist in water. Water purification becomes a little more important. Certainly reverse osmosis removes these isotopes. It also removes all the other minerals, which makes it not a very happy water for a biological system. If you're going to use reverse osmosis, make sure you remineralize your water using clean fulvic minerals. That would be the best. Fulvic minerals are mined from old plant deposits that were on the Earth before we had Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and so they're clean of isotopes. So you have to remineralize your water if you're going to purify it with reverse osmosis or distillation. That's a whole nother talk, but I'll just say that for now. And we need to there are other resins and things that will bind these metals, a little more complex than just a carbon filter, but some of those are pretty good. And water percolating through the earth tends to purify it, so if you live near spring water, that's usually much better than water that's been on the surface of the earth for a long period of time. Plants, I just mentioned plants. Certain plants tend to concentrate isotopes as well, which is great if you're trying to remove isotope or heavy metal contamination from a piece of land, but bad for you if you're depending on those plants for food. So you just need to have techniques for assessing your food, whether it's energetic techniques like electrodermal screening or dowsing or applied kinesiology. None of these are perfect, but you need to be mindful in asking questions and having techniques that you've learned to get answers. And then political activism. I don't think anybody wants a nuclear reactor in their backyard, and as we come to have a more realistic understanding of the real costs of nuclear energy, it quits looking like a very good deal. And the only people who are fighting to keep nuclear reactors online are the people who own them. And the rest of us should be saying no to nuclear power. So that's my little pitch for that. Next slide. Displacement, you need minerals. That's my service-marked statement there. You need to maintain good total body levels of clean iodine, potassium, magnesium, calcium, because it will displace existing isotopes that are in your body. It will fill up the slots where those isotopes might lodge, so they don't have a place to hold on to. I mentioned here role for strontium. Again, there's no good data on any of this. I'm going to give you some references a little bit later, but the strontium does get deposited in the bone, but it's unclear whether there's... I put a question mark after role for strontium. The more strontium you eat, the more strontium you're going to deposit, and it's not clear that you can really saturate the potential sites for strontium, and so that you don't pick up strontium-90 if it's in the environment. But you can at least dilute the pool of strontium you're exposed to by taking strontium. There is some data strontium's used because it increases bone density. The data is pretty slim yet that it actually makes your bones any stronger. There's a suggestion of it, but it's not good. But people have been taking strontium, and it seems to be safe, the stable isotopes of strontium. But strontium is a heavy molecular weight element, and so if you have bones that are made up of elements that are heavier molecular weight, they're going to look denser on a bone scan. So eating strontium will indeed increase your bone density, but there's no clear indication yet that it increases your bone strength. And with any of these minerals, you need to have ways of determining the dose you need. Don't just overconsume them. You can get into problems. So again, using the tools you have that would help you decide what a person needs or what you yourself need and what dose you need it at, you need to have a way of determining this. You can't just start consuming massive amounts of minerals and get away with it. You can get into trouble. So use a qualified practitioner or act as though you are one when you start talking about people taking minerals. Next slide. Detoxification. I mentioned here laser energetic detox. If you're not doing Dr. Cowden's techniques with laser energetic detox, you're missing out on a really cheap and simple and very, very powerful tool. So I'm just making a plug here. He has courses on how to do it at the Academy of Comprehensive Integrative Medicine. It is phenomenal the way that it really amps up and speeds up the whole detox process. But the other kind of older things, sea salt and baking soda baths, clay baths, taking clays internally, such as zeolite. I mentioned pascalite, that's a brand name, but it's essentially an aluminum-free bentonite clay that can be taken internally, and then chelators that we use orally all the time, DMSA, EDTA. Again, you need to know what you're doing to use these things and recommend them. But you can go back something like a sea salt and baking soda bath. That one is pretty good. I forget to mention here far infrared saunas also. So all of the things, there are no special tools really for radioactive isotopes and dealing with detoxification. The tools we already have work. You just need to figure out which ones are needed for which person and use them. Next slide. I mentioned antioxidants. Vitamin D3, both as an antioxidant and its ability to bind and assist with release and elimination of isotopes and things. Vitamin E, vitamin C, Vitality C, product from American Nutraceuticals, and also Dr. Gordon's product, same product, just different label, which is the mixture of C and ribose. Very tolerated, an oral form of vitamin C tolerated at very high doses. There are SOD superoxide dismutase mimics, such as Stress Release and Iplex from American Nutraceuticals. And those are derived from sprouts, used literally by the plane load after Chernobyl and Fukushima. I can't find a confirmation of this in the press, but there was a donor who paid for hundreds of tons of these products to be shipped to Chernobyl, who was actually given from what I understand, given a kind of Medal of Honor by the Soviet Union at the time. They felt that there were thousands of lives saved by these. Stress Release, again, just an extract from sprouts that is basically a superoxide dismutase like molecule that you couldn't find it in this country after Fukushima. The Japanese were buying all that the company could make, and still huge amounts being sent over there. Next slide. And then immune system support, managing stress. If people who are afraid of things have a poor immune system, so letting people know that you're working with and knowing this yourself, that there are tools that will manage it. It's a sad state that we live in on the earth today, and that can't be changed, and so it's kind of the serenity prayer, change the things you can and have serenity to accept the things you cannot change and the wisdom to know the difference. I mentioned adaptogens of your choice, so all the things that are used to modify the immune system, echinacea, noni, some of the alkyl glycerols, plant sterols, and sterilants have proven very useful in radiation exposure, just to keeping the immune system going in the face of these immune-damaging substances. A lot of the sterols and sterilants are from mushrooms, so a lot of the mushroom products have been very useful in supporting people exposed to radiation. And these can all be used. Next slide. Supplements. Certain supplements that can bind radioisotopes. So again, vitamin D3, freshwater algae, blue-green algae, algae from the Klamath Lake blue-green algae, chlorellas, the pectins, especially apple pectin. Citrus pectin works, it's more expensive. Kelps and seaweeds. Some of the potential problems with those is the oceans are so contaminated. You'd have to really kind of assay using either energetic testing or real assays to make sure that you're not just consuming more radiation from some of these products from the sea. But right now, at least what we're seeing here, you can find clean products. The clays that I mentioned before, so the zeolites and bentonites and things that bind the different radioactive isotopes. Turmeric, both antioxidant and seems to have some binding. The data on this is really hard, but there's a website, if you never have heard of it, I just mention it here, greenmedinfo.com, they're attempting to put together a database of articles that discuss these natural treatments, and which is a great service, and you can find information about a lot of these, at least the data that exists. Much of it is on there, and they're adding more every day about these radioactive risks and the substances used to counter them, the remedies. Next slide. Surveillance. Your concern is that these radioactive isotopes are going to be causing health problems, and so screen for health problems. Electrodermal screening, I think, is a great tool in this respect. In terms of, if you show someone a recorded signal of strontium-90 and they have a big negative reaction to it, a big twitch about it, you might assume they've been exposed to some of it. Their body recognizes that signal and it responds to it in a negative way. And it can also help improve your best guesses about which products to use with a given person. I mentioned that all of the radioisotopes that started showing up in screening in 2009 after the multiple satellites burnt up in the atmosphere. I'm going to talk about the Cascade here a little bit. Mentioned that before, but the Cascade is an understanding of how cancers develop in a body, not just from radiation, but like I say, cancers don't just fall out of the sky. You don't have a cancer one day and no cancer the previous day. There are things that have to happen that allow an oncocell to form, things that have to happen to allow that cell to establish a happy home in the body, protect itself from the body's immune system. And there's going to be a pre-conference talk October 11th in Orlando to focus just on this. Next slide. Okay, well let me just finish this, because I'm just for the people who've been listening, just for the continuity of the audio. Energetic treatments, I say be careful. So just hang with me here for just a minute, everybody. I'm not going to focus on this, but what I mean by this is if you're dealing in the realm of energetic medicine, you're dealing with frequency therapies, you're dealing with radionics, you're dealing with bioenergetic screening, I would just encourage you, and I'm certainly happy to take comments by email about this offline, I would encourage you not to engage head-on these isotopes. Do your work with dealing with supporting the person, making things work, making their systems of elimination work, making their immune system function, making them the part of them that recognizes self and non-self, making their cells' ability to repair better. But don't make war on isotopes. It's a war you're going to lose.